Is weird, odd, strange, or just plain bizarre is really your cup of tea? Then, the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast will give you that fix. Can't believe it? Well, listen for yourself as we deliver the strangest news you definitely won't find on CNN or Fox. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast.
Welcome to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Civilised Caleb, and today we will be starting out with the weirdest of the weird news, starting with a lawsuit that claims that a company's hiring policy discriminates against unhappy people. Also, a Kentucky driver got pulled over after an officer noticed that his license plate was hand-drawn. After a few more weird news stories, we'll get into some goddamn old people stories. One of my favorite subjects, but not my favorite. My favorite will be the third segment, which will be stories about alcohol, mainly focusing on recent studies taken on alcohol, because apparently consumption has been rising ever since the goddamn COVID hit. And after all that is said and done, I will get to my top 10 backstabs. Alright, so let's start off with this salon who had to remove their job ad for asking for happy people to apply because it was discriminatory against unhappy people. This occurred in England, where a hair salon says that it was told by a job center it couldn't run an advertising recruiting a, quote, happy stylist because the word is, quote, discriminatory against, quote, unhappy people. Don't you just hate unhappy people? They're the worst. The ad called for someone with 5 years of experience of working in a salon who was, quote, confident in barbering as well as all aspects of hairdressing. This is a busy, friendly, small salon, so only happy, friendly stylists need apply. So they put that advertisement up about a month ago, and then last Wednesday, the lady who runs the salon got a call from her local job center who informed her that they could not run her ad because the word happy is considered discriminatory. The job center went on to say that the advertisement may make some people feel they cannot apply if they do not consider themselves to be happy. Maybe that's because the advertisement goes out and says that directly. The lady who runs the salon said that the man who called her from the job center said, quote, I'm sorry, but the word happy is a discriminatory word, and we aren't allowed to use it, as somebody who is not happy will be discriminated against. He then went on to ask, should we change the word in case somebody thinks that they can't apply for the job because they are not a happy person? When asked, the owner of the salon said, quote, was I being a bit sensitive, and is this word happy discriminative, or has this whole world gone mad? She hasn't been following the news. The world went mad a couple months ago. Anyways, the owner of the salon has garnered many a customer due to its publicity during this entire catastrophe. Many of them sharing their outrage over the job center's, quote, ridiculous stance on the advert. One prominent customer said, quote, the world has gone absolutely mad. Does this mean that every descriptive word is discriminative? Happy, tall, smart, elegant? Good luck with your search. Another nice lady added, quote, I thought this was a joke, realizing it clearly isn't, has left me absolutely speechless. What has the human race come to? I like how she says she's speechless and then calls out to every single human on the planet. And finally, the last prominent quote was, quote, you cannot make it up. How ridiculous are they being? Stick to your guns, Alia. You are a happy salon, and if some numpties cannot deal with that wording, then tough. Now, personally, I think this whole fiasco is slightly crazy. I don't think she used the word happy in the advertisement because she only wanted happy people to apply. I think that's a roundabout way of getting people to apply by saying you have a happy environment. Plus, it only takes about 2 minutes in a personal interview to find out whether or not somebody is happy or unhappy, and whether or not you should hire them based on that. I personally find this whole situation ridiculous, but let me know if you think otherwise. Leave a comment. I'm sure everybody wants to know what you think about it. Alright, next story. Kentucky driver pulled over after an officer spots the hand-drawn license plate. This is a pretty short story. There's not much more to it than the actual title. This occurred in Millersburg, Kentucky, just northeast of Lexington. Police did not release the name of the driver, but said they pulled him over after an officer noticed that something did not seem right about his license plate. Police said the driver also did not have insurance and was also driving on suspended license. Police also offered the driver a tip, quote, "Next time, don't forget to draw the registration sticker." Now, this is pretty funny. You can go online and take a look at the photos of this drawn-on license plate. As somebody who's just absolutely horrible at anything that's related to art, I am fairly impressed. He kept it within the lines for the most part. There's no word as of now of whether or not this man has been arrested or fined or anything like that. But I can imagine, since it's a humorous situation, it will be taken with humorous results. Alright, next story. Pilots report seeing a, quote, guy in a jetpack near Los Angeles airport, but experts are skeptical. What do they mean by experts? Just jetpack experts? UFO experts? What kind of experts are they talking about? I suppose we'll get to that. The Federal Aviation Administration said last Tuesday that they are investigating reports from airline pilots that a guy in a jetpack was flying close to their planes as they approached Los Angeles airport in an effort to land. But one jetpack expert, it was a jetpack expert, what the heck, told CBS News he doubts the pilots actually saw the technology. Quote, 2 airline flight crews reported seeing what appeared to be someone in a jetpack as they were on their final approach to LAX around 6:35 p.m. CBS Los Angeles obtained recordings of communications between the aircraft and the tower last weekend. Quote, Tower American 1997, we just passed a guy on a jetpack. American 1997, okay, thank you. Were they off to your left side or your right side? Off to the left side at maybe 300 yards or so at our altitude. Only a few minutes later, another pilot reported the same sighting. Quote, we just saw the guy pass by us on the jetpack. But the jetpack experts have responded to the report with skepticism. CBS News correspondent Chris Cleave reported that there does not appear to be a jetpack on the market that could get someone to an elevation roughly 3,000 feet and back to the ground safely. That would require a lot of fuel or a parachute. No parachute was seen. And then the CEO of the LA-based Jetpack Aviation weighed in. Quote, they'd run out of fuel. They'd use fuel too quickly. A typical flight time for a jetpack is just 5 to 10 minutes. If it's a real jetpack, it's noisy. People would have heard it take off and land. That's a pretty lousy argument. It couldn't have been a jetpack. Jetpacks are noisy. But perhaps I'm just jealous because this guy gets to be CEO of a jetpack corporation. One of the cooler jobs to have on a resume. But this man also went on to say that Jetpack Aviation is under contract with the U.S. military to do research and development on this kind of technology. They do not sell it commercially, and they have confirmed it was not any of their aircraft. He added that the jetpack technology is not, in fact, commonly available. So, quote, whoever flew this probably built it themselves, which leads him to believe it was more likely a large drone or a balloon with a man dummy tied to it. Yes, that makes much more sense. And this is the best part of this story. The FBI has now launched an investigation on this sighting. In case you were wondering what the feds do with all the money you earn between January and March, well, they're investigating jetpack sightings. Alright, next story. This one's a bit controversial. A man avoids wearing his face mask on a flight by making a tube of Pringles last for several hours. So the whole central idea behind this is when you go into a restaurant or any place to eat something, you're allowed to take your mask off temporarily in order to shove your goddamn food down your face hole. And this particular passenger thought he would take advantage of this. He reported to local news that he tried out this, quote, experiment for a laugh, not because he is an anti-masker. Matching most airlines and most restaurants, the particular airline that this man was taking has introduced new rules that state that face masks must be worn at the airport, at the gate, and when boarding the plane, but passengers are allowed to remove their masks while eating food during the flight. Therefore, when the man boarded his flight on August 25th, he decided to see how long he could go without wearing a mask. He said, quote, I was just sitting on the plane and I thought I could make these Pringles last for hours. I calculated that there was about 100 Pringles in the tube, and you get away with eating a Pringle for about 2.5 minutes. He shared his results on Facebook with mixed results. He said that he only had to wear a face mask for about 10 minutes, once to use the toilet, and also when he had to remove his luggage from the overhead carrier. Quote, it just started out as a laugh, and then it was pretty much gone viral. It was basically making the point to say that you don't need to wear a face mask if you're eating or drinking. That's the moral of the story. I am not an anti-masker. I do not mind wearing a face mask. A lot of people are depressed at the time, and I like being funny and making people laugh. Isn't that fine? Fine and dandy. Some of his responses on Facebook range from, quote, good idea, I'm doing this next time, to, quote, glad I was not on this plane. The airline was asked to respond to the man's stunt, and they said, quote, passengers receive clear communications before they travel and via announcements on board to ensure that they are aware that, in line with the new guidelines, they are required to wear a face mask on board except when eating or drinking. While Star cabin crew will always try to be vigilant to ensure that passengers comply with the requirement to wear a mask, no issues were raised with the crew about this passenger's behavior during the flight. It is the responsibility of all on board to adhere to these measures for the health and safety of everybody on board. Alright, we have one more weird news story before we go into my old people stories. And it's kind of a weird one, I must warn you. On social media, a toast impressionist recreates famous paintings out of toast. I highly recommend you go online and follow me along as I go through all these photos. This art enthusiast has been recreating famous masterpieces in toast form as part of her lockdown lunch breaks. She is a 56-year-old from Portsmouth and has been producing toast impressionism since she began working from home last March. I'm now looking at her version of Amir's Girl with a Pearl Earring, in which she toasted her toast just like normal and then placed decorative cheese on it to make it look, or at least somewhat resemble, the famous painting. When asked why she do this, she said that she chose to express her frustration at the impact of the virus through the medium of bread. Something tells me that this lady is way smarter than all of us, and she's really just trolling us. My favorite one she's done here is her interpretation of the Scream, which is done on white bread that is not toasted. It's buttered, that way it looks like a white canvas. The roadway is done with peanut butter. The bridge rails are done with chocolate sticks. The sky is made of red and yellow peppers. And the man screaming is made out of vegetables. Quite amazing, if you ask me. This lady is a human resources worker at the University of Portsmouth. It's all coming together now. And she said that lockdown has also put her monthly visits to the National Gallery on hold. Quote, I thought I'd try to transfer the art I was missing to toast. I wanted to try and combine my passion for looking at art with the need to make lunch every day. She's totally trolling all of us. She went on to say that her interpretation of Barnes & Wood's American Gothic was, quote, lovely to eat, even though it was not her favorite painting. Quote, I made the woman's body a pig in a blanket, and bacon makes everything taste better. She said that she struggled to eat any of her blue artworks because they depended on the use of royal icing. She also said that her lunchtime creations were partly inspired by a 2019 visit to Japan where she saw, quote, amazing food art for the first time. Isn't that splendid? In the moment of crisis, some people are still innovating. But unfortunately, that's all the innovation I can bring you for this segment. Stay tuned to the next segment, where we will talk about old people. And if you stay tuned to the very end, I will give you my top 10 backstabbing. Stay tuned for that.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast. Let's get into some weird news stories about old people. Starting with a 103-year-old Michigan woman who celebrates her birthday by getting a tattoo. Holy Lord. Okay, so this this comes to us after the lady was spending months in isolation during the coronavirus lockdown. She was actually one of the people who was old enough to be in a nursing home. She's 103, I guess she's old enough for anything. Her name is Dorothy Palak, and she celebrated her birthday in June, saying that she finally got to check off one of her last bucket list items. Apparently, she was struggling mentally as a result of the lockdowns. Her granddaughter said, quote, COVID-19 had her in prison for months, referring to the nursing home lockdown. Only a week after being discharged, this grandmother decided that she wanted a tattoo. She got one, and it was a frog. The grandmother said frogs are one of the things she loves more than beer and burgers, which is a great reference to go to when describing something you love. Apparently, she took the tattoo like a champ. The tattoo artist said he didn't see her flinch once, saying that she took the needle better than anyone he has ever seen. After the tattoo, the old lady said that she absolutely loves it, and she ended up crossing a second thing off her list that same day with a motorcycle ride. So she went from 0 at the nursing house to 100 at the tattoo parlor and the motorcycle store. You know, the store where you buy motorcycles. Okay, our second old person story. And this is when a 56-year-old got arrested for assaulting a 55-year-old over Pokemon Go. This happened on August 10th. In the great island nation of Japan. As previously stated, police arrested a man on suspicion of assaulting a 55-year-old acquaintance who was seated inside his compact car. The man is accused of grabbing the other man through his car window, damaging his side view mirror after kicking it. Their dispute began after they were playing the smartphone game Pokemon Go. Apparently both men were competing for control of the same gym. I don't know what that means. I never got into Pokemon. But apparently they were fighting over control for the same gym with their respective collections of monsters. I think that's the Pokemon, right? When things got heated between the two of them, the altercation escalated. Apparently this was also the result of growing tensions for a long period of time, as both men have admitted to knowing each other for at least a few years after meeting through the game itself. The police put out a statement saying that they are not sure of the exact cause, but Pokemon Go is never a good reason to inflict violence on another person, and most online condemned attack as well as the overall behavior of these upper middle-aged men is completely irresponsible. The police went on to say that these two men are too old for this kind of altercation, and they need to learn some humility. Alright, final old person story. The U.S. government has proposed changing the definition of a showerhead in order to allow increased water flow following complaints from the president about his hair routine. So don't worry, I'll keep politics out of this as much as possible. But apparently under a 1992 law, showerheads in the U.S. are not allowed to produce more than 2.5 gallons of water per minute. The current administration argues that this limit should apply to each nozzle rather than the overall fixture, essentially doubling the 2.5 gallon limit. Of course, this whole debacle arose as a result of consumer and conservationist groups that argue that it is wasteful and unnecessary. Now, as a freedom-loving American, I find it is my right to be as wasteful and unnecessary as I wish. Not only that, I believe it's an American tradition to be wasteful and unnecessary, and I don't think it should be legislated. Perhaps it should be looked upon with social disgust. But personally, I don't think you should make any laws against it. First of all, once you put laws into place, that means that somebody can get arrested for it. Just think about it. Do you really want your neighbor to be arrested because his shower head used more than 2.5 gallons of water per minute or whatever it is? Seems like this should be a social consequence issue rather than a federal consequence issue. Nevertheless, that's my take. Tell me in the comments why I'm wrong. Anyways, these changes were proposed by the Department of Energy last Wednesday following complaints by the president at the White House last month, when the president said, quote, "So showerheads, you take a shower, the water doesn't come out. You want to wash your hands, the water doesn't come out. So what do? You just stand there longer. Or you take a shower longer? Because my hair, I don't know about you, but it has to be perfect. Perfect!" So he actually doesn't take my position that this should be a freedom argument. He's arguing that this should be a conservation argument, which I think is the wrong approach to the situation. But perhaps it will win him the showerheads he so desires. In response, the executive director of the Energy Conservation Group Appliance Standards Awareness Project, goodness gracious, that is one heck of an acronym, said that the proposal was, quote, silly. He went on to say that with 4 or 5 or more nozzles, you could have 10, 15 gallons per minute powering out of the showerhead, literally probably washing you out of the bathroom. If the president needs more help finding a good shower, we can point him to some great consumer websites that help you identify a good showerhead that provides a dense soak and a good shower. Showerheads in the U.S. already achieve high levels of customer satisfaction while saving people money. So I obviously think this whole argument's ridiculous. But I'm glad to learn where my tax dollars are going to be spent. Alright, next story. We are all out of old people stories, unfortunately. So let's get into some cool science stories. They really aren't that weird. They're just interesting. I like them. Alright, reverse waterfalls discovered in Australia. So, of course, the name does not imply what you think it implies. It actually applies to water running off a cliff and then quickly being blown back up it, making it look like the waterfalls are going backwards. You can go online and take a look from an aerial position of the phenomenon, and it blew up on Twitter last week. It is fairly gorgeous. You see the steam going over the cliff and then quickly being blown back up it and becoming sort of a cloud as it blows over the savannah. Quite beautiful. I suggest you look it up if you want to be happy this week. The event is getting many travelers from Australia itself, they can't let people in from outside Australia, to visit the location in order to see the gravity-defying mists. One of them said, quote, the apocalypse is so much prettier than I imagined. They say that although the site is pretty, they do not recommend people go and see it, as it involves you getting close to a cliff where winds reach about 45 miles per hour in order to create the phenomenon. Believe it or not, going near a cliff when it's windy is not safe practice. Alright, next science-y story. This one is more nature versus science. And guess who won? I bet it's not too hard to guess. A bald eagle shows air superiority by destroying a drone and sending it into a lake. So the ironic thing is that the drone was actually being manned by the Michigan Department of Environment. And apparently this bald eagle has some qualms with that fact, as he flew into the drone, ripped off a propeller, and threw it into Lake Michigan. The attack occurred on July 21st. The drone was supposed to be mapping out a shoreline in order to determine the erosion patterns near Michigan's Upper Peninsula. According to the quality analyst and the drone pilot, he had completed about 7 minutes of the mapping flight when the satellite reception became spotty. He, as a result, pressed a button to return the $1,000 drone to him and was looking at the video screen when the drone began to twirl. He said, quote, "It was like a really bad roller coaster ride." He apparently looked up and saw the eagle flying away, apparently unhurt by its confrontation with the drone. Apparently 2 bird watchers nearby also saw the bird attack, and they told officials they didn't realize it was a drone, but they thought that it was funny either way. I like bird watchers. They actually have a great sense of humor. I guess you have to in order to watch birds. Otherwise, you would get kind of dull. Apparently, the drone sent out 27 different warning notifications in the 3.5 seconds that it took to spiral into the Lake Michigan, including one that noted that a propeller was missing. Isn't that sad? The death of technology and progress as we know it. Unfortunately, a search from the shoreline failed to find the drone. Data eventually revealed that it landed 4 feet deep in the water, about 150 feet offshore. The drone team is now going over what can be done to possibly reduce a repeat attack. Some of these suggestions include using skins on the drone in order to make it look less like seagulls, as they think that that was the cause of the eagle flying into the drone in the first place. Maybe take a note from our earlier story, paint some eyes on the back of it, or make it look like a tiger. I don't know. If I was an eagle, I'd be pretty scared of a flying tiger. But then again, I'm no scientist. Alright, next story. Horses are starving in Morocco as tourism collapses. This one's sad. This one is a call to action from me, folks. Apparently, this starvation epidemic began as one tourism guide said that he had to sell one of his horses for just $150 in order to just help feed the others. It is said that he is still, quote, scared about the future for the other horses. He goes on to say that, quote, "The prospect of starvation looms for carriage horses and other animals normally used in Morocco's tourist mecca, since visitors have vanished during the coronavirus pandemic." According to the Society of Protection of Animals Abroad, Morocco's carriage horses and donkeys are threatened to the tunes of hundreds or even thousands as tourism collapse. Beyond that, they go on to say that these horses provide livelihoods for thousands of people in the area. God dang, this is a sad story. One of the tourist guides said, quote, "If you have a shop, you can close it. If you sell goods, you can store them. But imagine having horses who need to eat, drink, and get medical care." I think that's a false equivalency. If you have a shop, you usually have to pay loans on it, you have to pay bills on it, you have to pay taxes on it. So I think it's actually quite similar. The only difference is stores don't starve, unless you're talking about economics, but that's beyond me. After having to sell 7 different horses in July in order to feed his family, one of the tourist guides said, quote, "This is not something I can easily forgive myself for." So this is an incredibly tragic story. It goes on and on. You can go online and find places where you can donate to these nice folks in order to keep their horses from starving to death. So please feel free to do so. But for now, I'm going to move on to my last weird news story of the week before I get into my top 10 least inspirational quotes. And this is a pretty basic one. It's more of just a fun little tip for you guys. AMC is selling movie tickets for 15 cents now. This will only be on August 20th, and the available movies will be Ghostbusters, Black Panther, Back to the Future, and Grease. If you're not willing to pay 15 cents to see Olivia Newton-John dancing around, then I don't know what you would pay 15 cents for. There are, of course, many concerns with this prospect, as people expect that 15-cent tickets will draw in massive crowds of people, spreading the virus. But AMC says that they already have precautions in place. Tickets will be limited, seating will be spaced out more, unless people are from similar parties. They're boasting that movies in the 2020s are being sold at 1920s prices. So that's the angle they're taking, a historical one, which is beautiful, I think. I think this world would be a much better one if all movie tickets were 15 cents. I remember when they had that dang movie card, I don't remember what it's called, Movie Pass. And that's basically what movies cost when you have a Movie Pass. But it turns out people don't make any money when they sell their product for 15 cents, so they quickly went out of business. Hopefully the same will not be said for AMC. But who knows, movie theaters have been struggling for a while, and perhaps this is all they need to cut their profits by 1,000%. Okay. And that's it for my old people story. Stay tuned to the next segment where I will give you my top 10 studies on alcohol. And if you stay tuned to the end, I'll give you my top 10 betrayals throughout history. So stay tuned for that.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast. We're going to dive right into my top stories related to alcoholic studies. Let's jump in. Now, this story didn't start a few weeks ago, even though that's when the results came in. This started almost a decade ago with a study of 19,887 participants from the Health and Retirement Study Program. And what they found is that when compared to never drinking, low to moderate drinking was associated with significantly better trajectories of higher cognition scores for mental status, word recall, and vocabulary, and with lower rates of decline in each of these cognition domains. Now, they don't say that this is a conclusive study. What they're telling us is that this study kind of opens a gateway to further studies to be made in order to determine what exactly is helping these people who drink low to moderate amounts of alcohol to have better cognitive scores among middle-aged and older adults. Now, a quick side note, I dove a bit deeper into this study, and One thing they pointed out is that this basically is only true for white people. So us white people require alcohol in order to retain our cognitive balance. So that's good to know. I wonder if I'll be putting that on my resume in 20 or 30 years. Still drinks moderate amount of alcohol in order to retain cognitive discipline. That's something I would happily boast. Now, this article goes on to state that one of the main reasons people have basically evolutionarily adapted to drink alcohol as a good thing is because when societies first developed, right, the conflagration of multiple peoples is that our water supplies very quickly became filthy, dirty, disease-ridden. So one of the ways people combated that is that they developed alcoholic beverages, because in order to make alcohol, you have to distill it, and that requires a cleaning process. And so basically, alcohol kills any bacteria that's in it. So they think that's one of the reasons why we have adapted to drink more alcohol, is because that's how we killed germs in the olden days, and it's also why people in Europe often drank a lot of tea, because in order to make tea, you would have to boil your water, which kills all the germs. So kind of an interesting historical background and evolutionary background to all of this. Now, attached to this study is a CDC warning. I quote, "Beyond the immediate adverse effects of hangovers, drinking alcohol in excess has associations with various poor health outcomes." So in case you didn't know that drinking too much alcohol is a bad thing, the CDC's got your back, man. They say excessive alcohol uses include 4 drinks for women in 2 hours or 5 drinks for men within 2 hours. Now, some quick math here. They consider a drink as 14 grams of pure alcohol. So for like a glass of wine, that's 5 ounces for 1 glass of wine. So that's about a bottle of wine for every 2 hours. That's considered excessive drinking. So if you're drinking more than a bottle of wine every 2 hours, the CDC recommends that you cut that back just a little bit. You know, everything in moderation. Maybe have just 3/4 of a bottle for every 2 hours of your life. Now, what are these various health problems? The CDC says, quote, "Damage to the liver, inflammation of the pancreas, increased risk of cancer, hypertension." That's the only one I feel is hypertension. "Psychological disorders, unintentional injuries that a person sustained while drunk will feel. Harm to the fetus if a woman drinks while pregnant. Sudden infant death syndrome." The final one they state is alcohol use disorder, which is a roundabout way of saying you're a damn dirty alcoholic, much like myself. And they wrap it all up by saying this can ultimately cause, quote, "particularly in men who drink spirits, an increased risk of high blood pressure and stroke. However, there is also evidence that low to moderate alcohol consumption, fewer than 8 or 15 standard drinks in the United States per week for women and men, respectively, can have beneficial effect on health, including various cardiovascular diseases." So, like I've always said, folks, everything in moderation. Sure, alcohol is classified as a poison by the CDC, but the CDC says, hey, a cup of poison a week keeps the defibrillator on the wall. But one thing they go on to point out is that even with moderate to low consumption of alcohol, if you have a pre-existing disease such as a poor brain health or any other existing conditions, alcohol can exacerbate those. So you should avoid alcohol at all costs if you have a pre-existing condition. The wrap-up of this story essentially states that this is just the opening of a door to future research, because they're not really sure why alcohol helps people in middle-age to late stages of life when it comes to cognitive development or just cognitive maintenance. One of the study's leaders said, quote, "The role of alcohol drinking in cognitive function may be a balance of its beneficial and harmful effects on the cardiovascular system. Among low to moderate drinkers, the beneficial effects may outweigh the harmful effects on the cardiovascular system." So, essentially, they're just this study is really just a gateway to future studies in order to find out why the drinking of alcohol helps people in later stages of life to maintain their cognitive abilities. You know, maybe it has nothing to do with the alcohol. Maybe it's something that the alcohol incentivizes you to do outside of the alcohol itself. So they're going to study more into this, which I would love to sign up for, by the way, if any of these medical researchers are listening. If you need somebody for an alcohol study, I should be at the top of the list. And they end their survey by saying there is some contradictory evidence out there and that you should further research this subject on your own accord. So go out there and Google the health benefits of alcohol. and the non-benefits. That would probably help too. There's a few downsides to alcohol, folks. Let's face facts. Okay, it's not all sunshine and roses. Okay, but for now we're going to move on to another study called, quote, Can Drinking Alcohol Kill Germs? And the reason this study was created was in order to discover whether or not it can cure coronavirus by simply throwing back a few margaritas every day. But they concluded that drinking alcohol does not kill germs inside the body. Wow, big shocker there. Another hard hit to the alcohol brigades. Now, one of the things they cite in this study is that there's a lot of misconceptions about alcohol killing germs. They say that if you pour alcohol on germs, it will kill the germs. As we've stated earlier, alcohol can be used as a substitute for hand sanitizer. But it's a different story when it's in your body. Essentially, just imagine drinking hand sanitizer. That's essentially what you're doing when you're drinking alcohol in order to kill germs. The benefits are far outweighed by the negatives in this kind of situation. So, in order to clarify, the study says, quote, chemically speaking, there are three main types of alcohols: isopropyl, ethylene, and methyl. All kill germs by breaking down the cell membrane, which cause the inner components of the cell to dissolve. Most hand sanitizers contain isopropyl. And they go on to say that most alcohol that is consumed is ethyl alcohol, which is dissolved in the digestive process. Now, once ethyl alcohol is consumed, the digestive process quickly breaks down the ethanol molecules, which makes it difficult for them to kill any bacteria that they encounter within your body. But they say, quote, that's actually a good thing because your body contains billions of good bacteria that you can't live without. If ethanol could kill germs inside your body, it would wipe out those good bacteria along with the bad. So your body breaks down the alcohol as quickly as possible. For those who aren't, alcohol enthusiasts like myself, if you drink, when you consume alcohol, basically what happens is your body puts aside all other forms of metabolism breakdown of nutrition, and it goes straight for the alcohol because it recognizes the alcohol as a poison. So once you start drinking alcohol, your body immediately attacks the alcohol to break it down as quickly as possible so it has a small effect. And that's basically the crux of that study. Pretty basic stuff. So our next short little study is called Drinking Alcohol While Doing Intermittent Fasting. Yes or no? So for those who don't know what intermittent fasting is, it's basically the idea that if you only eat 1 or 2 meals a day, like you only eat within an 8-hour period, your body will somehow boost your metabolism, and that'll incentivize muscle growth and weight loss. I tried this out for a week, forgetting to take into account that fasting makes you really hungry. I forgot that's one of the side effects of starving yourself, is that you get real hungry. So then I ate a bunch. And since we're short on time, I'm going to be pretty quick with this one. Essentially, what the study found is kind of boring. They found that if you drink while you're intermittent fasting, you can drink, but you should only drink a little bit, because essentially your metabolism, when you haven't eaten anything, your metabolism runs slower. So when you drink a bunch of alcohol, your metabolism isn't running quickly, so it can't break down the alcohol. So it takes only about 2 or 3 glasses of wine for you to become absolutely hammered. I'm not saying this from personal... Okay, maybe I am saying a little bit from personal experience. When you haven't eaten in 4 days and then you try a bit of alcohol, it doesn't go well. Your body wants to consume any nutrition it can receive as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And so it's not really a good idea to starve yourself for a day or two and then drink alcohol. But there's not a problem with doing regular intermittent fasting where you only eat once a day and having a glass of wine with your meal. That's perfectly healthy according to womenshealthmag.com. which is where I go for all my health facts, by the way. So if you're looking for a source on that, if you want to be as healthy as me, go to womenshealthmag.com. And if you stay tuned to the end, I'll give you my top 10 betrayals throughout history. So stay tuned for that.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast. We're going to go right into my top 10 betrayals throughout all of history. Starting off where all my historical top 10 start, Russia, the inside scoop. Andrei Valslav was a Bolshevik revolutionary and an effective Soviet commander throughout all of World War II, until when he was captured by the Nazis. He then enthusiastically aided their cause. Vlasov revealed as much as he could about Soviet defenses and created an army of ex-Soviets to fight for Germany on the Eastern Front. And he was finally punished at the end of the war when he fell back into the hands of his vengeful countrymen. He initially refused to surrender to U.S. troops and was therefore captured by the Russians. He was confined in prison where he was interrogated, a trial being held, sentenced him along with 11 other senior officers from his army to death for high treason. He has a pretty interesting story. Nobody really knows where his morals lie and whether his allegiance is truly with Russia or if it is with Germany. Alright, number 9. Emilio Alguando, who is remembered as the first president of the Philippines and the, quote, first Filipino Quisling. So for those who don't know what Quisling means, it is traditionally referring to an individual who aids an invader that is occupying their country. So that gives you an idea of where this guy stands in the eyes of the Philippines. Anyways, while he was president, Japan threatened the Philippines, and Alguinaldo, who had previously distinguished himself in the struggle for Filipino independence, passionately encouraged his surrender to Japan. Perhaps because he wanted to lead a Japanese puppet government. Nobody's really sure. Nobody really knows, and nobody will ever really know. But he is also remembered for some good things. He fought off the Americans while the Americans were attacking the Philippines in an effort to colonize them. But that's more of a subject for my top 10 worst presidents. Perhaps coming in the future. Alright, number 7. This one's a personal favorite, actually. So this occurred during the development of the Manhattan Project, which gathered some of the greatest scientific minds in the entire world to create the first atomic bomb. These individuals worked closely together every day. Most of them did not even know they were building an atomic bomb. But among those who did, most of them had no idea that 3 of their colleagues, Theodore Hall, David Greenglass, and Klaus Fox, were feeding their discoveries to the Soviets. As a result, the USSR detonated their first atomic bomb in 1949, much earlier than previously expected by the USA. This, of course, led to I think about 4 decades worth of Cold War activities, which sparked Vietnam, as well as the Korean War, and, most likely, the war in Iraq. Or it at least played a huge part in all of those. Most of the men accused of trading these secrets were not, in fact, punished. Most of them, in fact, died under USSR watch. Alright, number 7. This one is highly popularized thanks to that Shakespeare fellow. And it happened in the ancient times when Marcus Brutus and more than a few co-conspirators stabbed his best goddamn friend Julius Caesar to death. Of course, as pop culture reads, he mistakenly believed that he was saving the democratic Roman Republic from descending into a dictatorship. Julius Caesar had a slightly big ego, as you would if you were in his position too, and as a result pushed for everybody to elect him dictator. Most people actually wanted him to be a dictator, but the republics knew that this would be a bad idea, especially in the long run, so they assassinated him. But of course, this did not lead to a lack of turmoil. However, of course, once Julius Caesar died, everybody scrambled to seize as much power as they possibly could, many more deaths than necessary, when they could have just knocked Julius Caesar down a peg instead. This one's particularly interesting because Brutus is known to be Julius Caesar's best friend, and he also felt that saving Rome was in his blood. His ancestor was a celebrated hero who overthrew Rome's original rulers hundreds of years earlier, so he thought he was fulfilling some kind of destiny. Alright, number 6? Alright, number 6, Alfred Redl, who served as an Austro-Hungarian counterintelligence agency in the years before World War I. He was also a spy for their enemy, however, Russia. It is said that he was motivated by both blackmail and profit, the blackmail coming from Russia, who had evidence of his greatest secret, his homosexuality. However, it is also said that he made an immense amount of profit by sending all of these facts to Russia, and he provided enough information to the Russians that some say he was responsible for the deaths of about 500,000 Austro-Hungarians during the course of World War I. Alright, number 5. I like this one because it's nice and short. Robert Ford, who was a young man in search of adventure when he and Jesse James formed their notorious gang of outlaws, but he soon found himself facing murder charges, so in an effort to avoid such charges, he struck a deal with authorities to kill Jesse James in exchange for immunity and a reward as well. He shot James in the head as the legendary gang leader was straightening one of his pictures. Fairly brutal, nice, short and sweet story of revenge. A decade later, however, Robert Ford was shot in the neck with a shotgun by another fellow while in his tent. Alright, this next one, number 4, is kind of filthy. The Americans Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, who were executed after being accused of espionage in 1953 after Ethel's brother, fellow Soviet spy David Greenglass, testified against them. David Greenglass is the aforementioned Soviet traitor who was working on the atom bomb. In 2001, Greengrass revealed that it was actually his wife who had been the one involved in the spy ring, not Ethel herself, and, quote, he would not sacrifice his wife for his sister. Pretty scandalous stuff. Alright, number 4. This one is also a bit spicy. Stacy Castor, who some people might recognize the name of, had already been widowed once when her second husband died mysteriously. Suspicious authorities soon figured out that both husbands had been poisoned to death. With her options running out, Miss Castor attempted to fake her own daughter's suicide and frame her for the murders. Absolutely brutal woman. Her daughter survived, though, and was able to testify against her own mother in court. As a result, Castor would have to serve just over 51 years before she became eligible for parole, which effectively at her age is a life sentence, of course. And she eventually died on June 11th, 2016, the manner of her death being described as undetermined. They don't know what killed her. Alright, number 3. This is another personal favorite. It's so inconsequential, but that's part of the reason why I find it so funny. So, the Baltimore Colts owner, Robert Irsay, wanted to move his NFL team to Indianapolis to become the Indianapolis Colts as they are today. The state of Maryland tried to pass legislation allowing Baltimore to seize ownership of the team, which is kind of a disgusting act if you ask me. The night before the vote, however, 15 moving trucks arrived at the Colts stadium and secretly moved the entire team to Indianapolis overnight, leaving Baltimore fans without a team. And that's why I find the story so hilarious. Alright, number 2. Iva Diacono, who broadcast anti-American propaganda for Japan in World War II under the name Tokyo Rose. She had no intention of becoming a traitor, though Diankyo happened to be in Japan and got stuck there when they bombed Pearl Harbor. She fell on hard times, and when she refused to announce her American citizenship, that did not help her standing in Japan. The Americans sentenced her to 10 years in prison. In a sensational trial, President Gerald Ford would pardon her eventually. Kind of funny, kind of tragic, most likely led to a lot of deaths, which is why it's so high on this list. Also the fact that it was mostly coincidence, which makes it seem like this kind of thing could happen to anyone who is outspoken. Sort of frightening. Alright, since we are early, we are going to do a couple honorable mentions. Starting off with the famous case in which Michael Jackson stole Paul McCartney's career, basically. They were friends and largely collaborators in the 70s and 80s. And it was also said that McCartney was the one who got Michael Jackson interested in buying the publishing rights to music catalogs, which is basically when you go say, oh, Johnny Cash is dead, let me buy all of his music to make sure it's properly distributed and so I can make tons of money on it. But McCartney had no way of knowing that Michael Jackson would actually go behind his back and acquire the rights to 251 Beatles songs, which is said to have permanently ended their relationship forever. Kind of sad, kind of funny. Alright, another honorable mention, Joan of Arc. Obviously the inspiring military leader who led a rally of France's armies against the English in 1930. She was captured by Burgundian forces who had allied with the English against their own countrymen, and as a result, she was tried for heresy and burned at the stake. Pretty tragic. I should probably also put this one in there. The betrayal of Jesus. This is one of the more famous betrayals of all time. Of course, Judas Iscariot, who, it's said, gave Jesus up to the authorities for 30 pieces of silver. Previously, he was one of the disciples. Medieval art depicts Judas often showing him with red hair, perhaps to make him stand out. This tradition has contributed to centuries of discrimination against redheads, apparently. I find that one a bit far-fetched, but perhaps that's true. Kind of a fun little detail. While we're on the topic of Jesus, we may as well mention Joseph in the Bible, who was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, etc., before he rose out to become one of Egypt's leaders. And while we're at it, we go ahead and mention all of the revolutions that have happened throughout history. Not going to include any of those on this list. Alright, number 1, Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin. So in 1939, Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin were best pals. They signed a non-aggression treaty. At the time, they couldn't be getting along any better. They planned on conquering the world together. However, evidence began to mount that Germany was preparing to invade the USSR, but Stalin refused to believe that Hitler would violate their agreement. In fact, he would often kill any general or any military leader who brought this to his attention, making any announcement of the invasion a personal death sentence. And of course, as a result, millions of Soviet troops lost their lives in the ensuing German invasion. Estimates usually range between 10 and 20 million. Pretty absurdly brutal. Two horrible men fighting it out. But that is all I have for you this week, and I'll thank you for listening to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I will also ask that you follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and subscribe to us. Leave us a comment or a review. That makes us happy. Thank you, and have a good night.